Good afternoon, everyone. We will start in just a couple minutes. While you are waiting and while you are here, we'd love to know who's in the audience, especially because we have participants from all over the 4th Congressional District. It would be great if you could say hello in the chat. Tell us your name, tell us your company's name, and what community you're located in, and which chamber you're affiliated with, if you could do that. So your name of your business, where your business is located, and which chamber of commerce you're affiliated with, or hopefully more than one chamber for some people. Okay, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Riedman. I am president and CEO of the Charles River Regional Chamber. But I wanted to welcome you all today to really what's something of a first for us. Many of you have heard from Congressman Jake Auchincloss in your communities, but this is the first time that all the chambers throughout the 4th Congressional District have worked together to bring you a discussion like this. And we're really appreciative of Congressman Auchincloss making that possible and agreeing to do this. And we will be interested in hearing about what he has to say and hearing your thoughts today. But our participating chambers include the Blackstone Valley Chamber, the Brookline Chamber, the Cranberry County Chamber, the One South Coast Chamber, the Taunton Area Chamber, the Tri-Town Chamber, and our chamber, the Charles River Regional Chamber. So it's nice to have all the districts here. In format today, we're going to start with some opening remarks from the congressman. Then I'm going to invite my chamber colleagues to ask some questions or a question if they have anything they want to follow up on. And then we'll invite anyone else who's watching today and participating today to ask questions. And you can do that either by submitting them through the Q&A or you can raise your hand and we'll do our best to get to everyone. We only have an hour and there's a lot to talk about. So I urge everyone, when you do think about your question, to just kind of keep your question tight so we have enough opportunity to move on to things. And we'll try to keep the pace moving, but we're really grateful and really nice to see and be working with my chamber colleagues from around the district. And Congressman Auchincloss, great to see you again. Welcome.
Greg, thank you for organizing this. Thank you for coordinating this. And I'll echo your appreciation for everyone who's spending their time with us this afternoon. And it's just so nice to be able to for me to be able to talk to the business community of the Massachusetts 4th in one place at one time. So I'm excited. I will take your advice myself and keep my comments tight. Nobody wants to stare at a box on a Zoom screen as I blab on and on. So let me focus my commentary really on three things, which is tariffs, health insurance, and the macro business environment. So first, tariffs. This, I am sure, is top of mind for so many, not just business owners, but also employees, people with 401ks, people who are thinking about prices or looking at prices, looking at their home insurance or car insurance bills. These tariffs are innumerate, chaotic, and incompetent. And I'm not saying that in a reflexively partisan way. I actually publicly disagreed with President Biden's Section 232 and 301 tariffs when he did them. So I have criticized even my own party when I think tariffs have been rolled out in an ineffective way. But what President Biden did was like a microcosm of what Donald Trump is doing. What Donald Trump is doing is really, it almost is like he's a mad scientist trying to figure out a way to tip a good economy into a recession. And it is having the effect of raising prices, of injecting uncertainty into the business climate, and of driving China and Europe closer together. It's accomplishing none of the stated aims. For tariffs to be effective, and tariffs can be effective, I'm a free trader, but I'll be the first to say tariffs have a role in US economic policy, but to be effective, they need to be nested within a coherent long-term industrial policy that has a point of view and a plan about what types of industry are critical to the country and how tariffs, along with tax credits, along with job training, along with advanced market commitments, can help revitalize said industries. There's none of that. And in fact, he's actively degrading the state capacity and the private sector animal spirits that can help us do that. To be effective, tariffs have to be aligned with diplomacy. our allies, our adversaries have to understand what these tariffs are trying to accomplish and how they can get on the right side of them. And again, because of the way that they were calculated, because of the way they were rolled out, because of how they are constantly shifting, our allies and adversaries have no idea. And what China is doing is it's going to Europe and tapping Europe on the shoulder and saying, this is the junior varsity squad of geoeconomics. Let's you and I establish terms of trade that actually make sense for each other. And they're doing the same thing with Southeast Asia. And we're going to get boxed out. We will not be at the table. We will be on the menu. And it's going to be bad for US economic competitiveness in the long run. And then finally, for tariffs to be effective, they've got to be done through Congress. One, because that's the Constitution. And this use of emergency powers to pass tariffs needs to be rolled back. But two, because if tariffs are passed in a bipartisan statute by Congress, it creates enough long-term certainty for businesses and investors and consumers to plan around them and say, all right, we're going to think about reorienting our supply chains. And we have confidence that this will be the regulatory regime for the next decade. But nobody can do anything when this guy is, tweeting something different every 15 minutes. So these tariffs are destroying economic value in real time. I strongly oppose them. Unfortunately, congressional Republicans, rather than standing up to them and taking back congressional authority over tariffs, actually inserted into a bill passed last week that no Republican could get floor privileges for a bill that would take away the president's tariff authority. I mean, the Republicans are actively trying to cede their oversight and statutory power. So it's frustrating. And we're going to have to, continue to weather this trade war chaos for the months to come. Number two, let me talk about health insurance. The bad news is there are going to be some Medicaid cuts, I think, ultimately. Not a guarantee, but I think there will be some. I believe those Medicaid cuts will ultimately raise commercial health insurance rates because people who are unenrolled still consume health care. That consumption of health care, which largely happens in ERs, gets cross-subsidized into higher health insurance rates for employer-based health insurance. And my strong sense from having talked to so many employers throughout the district and municipalities, I will add, is that health insurance costs are probably the biggest squeeze on your budget. They're going up by about 2x of overall inflation. And so the last thing that anybody needs is for commercial health insurance to get even more expensive. And I worry that that is what's going to happen with the Medicaid cuts. On the better news front, the president just yesterday announced an executive order that actually had a couple of good things on drug pricing. Probably the best thing it had in there was much tighter scrutiny on the relationship between pharmacy benefit managers and brokers. So as you deal with a broker as an employer or a plan sponsor, you might expect, like you would for your employee's retirement account, that broker has sort of a fiduciary responsibility, is going to get you the best deal in a pretty arm's length way. That is not what happens with health benefits. The brokers and the PBM relationships are really very intertwined in a way that I think should give nobody confidence that you're getting the best deal possible. I had legislation last Congress actually that we were working on that would have tackled some of that broker transparency. The president, by executive order, has requested HHS to do that. Given the staff and programming and personnel cuts at HHS, I'm perhaps a little skeptical that there's any kind of inbuilt competence to do that work, but it is actually an important step in more transparency and accountability in the drug pricing supply chain, particularly for pharmacy benefit managers. Finally, let me close on the macro environment here. First with Massachusetts and then broadly. Massachusetts is getting disproportionately hit in these last 4 months. You look at the attacks on the Eds and Meds enterprise, whether through its university research funding with Harvard, grant freezes over concerns about DEI, NIH indirect costs. You look at the Port of Boston with the president's order about Chinese ships would get disproportionately impacted there. We're an ecosystem that has long welcomed both students and immigrants, and students and immigrants are being used as geopolitical pawns and as political pawns over issues about trade and immigration in a way that I think is really damaging to our culture here. So Massachusetts is bearing, I think, a disproportionate brunt of the chaos swirling around Trump. And solidarity is so critical, not just amongst business leaders, but across sectors, business, media, labor, political leaders, universities, our nonprofits. There is strength, not just in numbers, but in interweaving those numbers to indicate to each other and to the administration that there is a dense and deep civil society that is opposing what he's trying to do. And while Massachusetts, I think, is disproportionately hit, we're all feeling the overwhelming miasma of uncertainty right now throughout the global business environment. And as you all know better than me, uncertainty is poison for business. It's hard to make hiring decisions. It's hard to purchase capital equipment. It's hard to strike long-term deals or do M&A when everything is uncertain. When you don't know what this guy is going to talk about tomorrow, when you don't know about the ability of courts to issue binding orders, and that cloud of uncertainty, is going to be a fog that we're going to be having to navigate for a while yet to come.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And you actually hit on 3 areas that we wanted to make sure you talked about. So we talked about it with a group of chamber directors. Why don't we go and start with tariffs? I think Jeannie Heber in Blackstone had a member who actually wanted to ask a question named Eric Lostein. Eric, if you're here, we'd love to just raise your hand so we can find you, and we'll put you in. We'll put you in and let you go first because I know you have another commitment. So, Eric, are you there? I see you raised his hand. So
yes.
Okay,
yes.
great.
Can you hear me?
We can. Can't see you, but we can hear you. So
okay.
We'll take it.
All right. Apologies that you can't see me. Yep. Maybe if I do this, join as a panelist.
Yeah, that should work. All right, Eric, you there?
Can you see me now?
We can. Well,
okay.
we'll assume that you're handsome. Oh, there you are. I was right. Okay, welcome.
Yeah, it probably assumed incorrectly, but
I don't think so.
But thank you very much for including me today, and thank you very much, Congressman, for your remarks. I run a business in central Massachusetts. We're out of Worcester, Millbury, and Webster. And our business is a lot of international trade and manufacturing. And for the tariffs, it's had a very challenging impact on our business. And I think there's maybe 3 buckets that have impacted us. And I think my question is, what can be done to mitigate some of these challenges? The first bucket that we're facing, like you mentioned, is the uncertainty and rapid change. I don't know what's going to happen 30 days later. A lot of our contracts are 60 days, 45 days in the future before I can change prices. So it makes there's a lot of acute short-term pain and tariffs that need to be paid for a small to medium-sized business that we just can't avoid in the short term. And maybe after 60, 90 days, we can change something, but it's very hard for us to work around that in the meantime, especially when it changes day to day. The second thing for us is we export a fair amount of product into Canada, and we have manufacturing jobs in the state that are potentially being jeopardized because of some of the tariffs on our industry that Canada has imposed as retaliation. So that's something we're struggling with, trying to figure out. And the third thing it probably is something that other businesses are seeing. The increases in prices of some of our commodities is going up quickly, and I'm concerned from a bigger picture perspective, 3-4 months down the road, how that's going to impact our general economy. We do have portions of our supply out of China, not that much, but some which are almost impossible to source right now. But there are some general increases which are intractable in terms of they're going to have to go through our system and potentially impact the consumer. So those are my 3 concerns, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen.
I appreciate you laying them out so clearly and localizing them in your experience, because it's easy to talk about these things in the abstract, but when you make it specific and concrete, I think it's helpful for all of us. And what you just laid out is why I don't like tariffs. Again, in theory, tariffs can be an appropriate part of industrial policy. The way they're being done now is chaotic and so you can't plan around them. You also can't lobby around them. There are big multinational corporations that have entire global logistics shops that are figuring this out in real time, and then they've got a government relations department that's getting lunch at Mar-a-Lago, and they're trying to get themselves all hooked up, and you can't do that, right? Like, you're just trying to make things work on a day in, day out basis. So it ends up being pretty regressive as well. It really impacts small businesses disproportionately. And it also, people sometimes don't talk about this with trade. Trade is not just about markets for exports, that's part of it. And obviously, Massachusetts, with our services industry in particular, we are a huge net exporter of services, professional services, and otherwise. It's also about cheaper imports, which allows our businesses to be competitive. And what you're describing with the Chinese imports is a case in point on that. There's a world where, and I was on the select committee on China for 2 years. China has been cheating on the terms of trade. I think there's widespread consensus that the de minimis loophole, for example, was abused, and I was in favor of getting rid of that. And is there a world where we do some tariffs on China? Yes, but they need to be passed thoughtfully through Congress and given enough timeline and ramp where the entire economy can reorient around that. That's not what this is.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It is obviously, as you know, Congressman, touching every element of this. I had a conversation yesterday with the owner of a tile shop who says, how can he have his customer come in and order tile when you can't tell the customer what the price is going to be?
That's right.
You just don't know. Yeah, you can buy that tile to do your remodel, but I can't tell you what it's going to be, more or less or whatever. So it's really hard. I wanted to go, actually, the second thing you talked about was healthcare. And I was curious about the pharmacy benefit manager program, because I know that's something you've really cared about. And we'd love to know if there is any difference or what you think the next step is there. But also, in general, if we're providing relief on pharmacy pricing, which I'm sure we all believe is a great idea, how does that balance with what's happening to the biotech industry in general and the gutting of supporting that through NIH grants and whatever? So, and Karen Miller in the Globe this week wrote about how maybe the United States is in danger of losing its entire biotech industry because of the way we're gutting this. So maybe you could help us think about all these things.
I appreciate that question, Greg. I spent a lot of time thinking about those things. I want to directly address the idea that pharmacy prices and biotech need to be in tension with one another. Because I understand that thesis, and it's oftentimes put up as like, here in Massachusetts, we want a biotech industry to succeed. It's a major economic engine for Massachusetts with a big economic multiplier. But we also want low drug prices. And how do we resolve that tension? And like one of my core policy theses in Congress that I passionately believe is that they are not in tension. We want insurance companies to pay for value of procedures, as well as pay for value of new therapeutics, whether it's Vertex's new non-opioid painkiller, which I think creates a lot of value, or it's a treatment for cystic fibrosis, or if it's a treatment for ovarian cancer. I want insurance companies to pay for that value. I also want them to charge low or no out-of-pocket costs at the pharmacy counter, because when a medication is appropriately prescribed by a physician, there is no moral hazard. There should be no out-of-pocket costs for that. When we all have automobile insurance. With your car insurance, you've got a deductible, right? Because your car insurance provider says, hey, we need you to have some skin in the game. You need to drive safer, so we're going to give you a deductible. And that makes sense as part of insurance design theory. What does not make sense is telling somebody like, we really need you to try harder to not get asthma, so we're going to give you some skin in the game for your inhaler. That makes no sense. There's no moral hazard when it comes to almost the entirety of the prescription drug portfolio. And so really, people pay premiums. Doctor prescribes you a medication. You should not have a copay for that. If there is a generic that's therapeutically equivalent to the brand drug, you should be required to try the generic first. That's fair. Otherwise, the drug makers will be able to price gouge. But otherwise, there should be no copays. And that's really the policy outcome that I've been driving towards in Congress. We've been making some progress to that, fits and starts. It's impossible to tell, frankly, where this administration is at on PBM reform, because the only time RFK talks about biopharma, it's with these conspiracies of corruption and poisoning American kids, and it's just complete quackery and nonsense. As I said, the president's executive order yesterday did nod towards the right things on pharmacy benefit managers, which are the middlemen of drug pricing, and I support that. I'm skeptical that that can actually be manifested into policy because they don't have a policy shop anymore at HHS. And so I don't quite know what it means, but I guess it's better than him not saying it. In terms of health insurance costs, though, for small businesses here in Massachusetts, obviously the pharmacy benefit is part of that. But the majority of increases from health insurance really come from hospital prices more than it comes from prescription drug prices. And that is galloping ahead. And this is maybe a different conversation that we can have. I'm increasingly of the belief that the era of small group health insurance provided by small businesses or small municipalities is coming to an end. It's just not sustainable. We're going to need more and more, almost like a Medicaid for all style approach, where more and more people are enrolled in mass health, not because they're low income, not because they have disabilities, but just because that is the right way to define the risk pool.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go now to Pam at Cranberry Coast, who has a question. I think this should be a bipartisan issue, but you can help us understand it. Go ahead, Pam.
Hi, thank you, Congressman. So one of the things that is brought up a lot by our members, we have a lot of restaurants. We even feel the effect of it in, with the chamber for our events, is credit card fees. Is there anything being done, up on the Hill to address these fees that just keep going up every time we turn around?
By the credit card fees, you mean like the interchange fees?
Yeah.
Swipe fees, I think.
Swipe fees,
Swipe fees, yeah.
Paying for events, paying for your meal, and and you hear that, oh, well, you can charge it back, or you can say, do you want to pay for those fees? But most of our member businesses don't want to put that on their customer. They want their customers to have the flexibility and the ease, but they're getting hurt.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the interchange fee issue. I don't think that the interchange fees are going up, but I certainly understand that they're a pain point. And there is pretty significant policy action. There's a bill called the Credit Card Competition Act in Washington. I'll just speak plainly on this issue. There's really two opposing groups, kind of. One is small businesses, alongside like a lot of like 7-Elevens and gas station attendants who want to see these interchange rates lowered statutorily, kind of like Australia did. On the other side of that is a number of groups, but one of them is the airlines, because those credit card points really become airline miles. And the credit card points that credit card companies provide to people are sourced from the interchange fees. And there's a big constituency that really loves credit card points as well. So I have to be keyed into my constituents who like credit card points and airline miles, as well as my constituents who don't like interchange fees. And it's not a simple issue to resolve.
Great, thank you. And I have one more question that I know of from one of my colleagues in a different chamber, and then we will go to questions from you. So a reminder to everybody in the audience, you can submit a question through the Q&A, but we'd be happy to have you ask it in person. So if you can raise your hand, we will go to you, the people who've raised their hand in a minute. But one last question, Congressman, from Mike O'Sullivan, the CEO at the One South Coast Chamber. Mike, you're up.
Thanks, Greg. And Congressman, thanks for doing this. And it's nice to see you again.
Hey, Mike.
You're probably not going to be surprised to hear I'm going to ask about the Washington Bridge, even though I know it's not directly in your district, but we've had many conversations. Do you have any updates or any more information on where things stand with that at this point in time?
Yes, I appreciate the question. You're right, not technically my district, but very much affects my constituents in southeastern Mass, so I care a lot and we're tracking it. So I'm just going to read a couple notes I have. One, the demolition is a separate contract that's nearly complete. The Trump administration has said that they will honor the $220 million worth of grants awarded under President Biden and have allowed Rhode Island to draw down the first $30 million. This is for the construction portion of it, design and construction. The state still has not awarded the contract for the rebuild. It's hoping to complete the request for proposal this summer. And apparently that RFP process has been a debacle.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's I would say it's a far cry from Josh Shapiro rebuilding I-95 in 2 weeks, huh?
Yeah, you can say that again. and I understand that you may not have any control but anything you can do, because it's terrible. It's terrible, and it's it's terrible for the residents if they just want to go that way. But for businesses, it's awful. I mean, we've got at least 3 or 4 industrial parks, east, and in this group, north and east of, Providence, and you try to get through there. At certain times you can't. Businesses, especially truck drivers, you can't set a shift to say, okay, let's do it at this time, because the traffic today might be significantly worse at a certain time than it might be tomorrow, than it would be Saturday. It just, there's no way to plan around it. So anything you can do to help and stay on top of it, and if you need us or our businesses to voice their concern or anything, we've got plenty of people who would do that.
I appreciate that, Mike. It's just another injection of uncertainty, right? At a time when there's uncertainty at all levels, right? This is another source of it. And I talked to constituents in Fall River and Attleboro, and they're rerouting their lives around it. I mean, as you know, Fall River, Attleboro, in a lot of ways, more socioeconomically oriented towards Providence than they are towards Boston. And so it really, it is changing a lot of labor and family patterns. And I will absolutely stay on it at the federal level. The other thing I've done, though, I think I'm basically the only Democrat to publicly criticize the Rhode Island governor for not fixing this. Like, people don't, too often we refuse to just call balls and strikes on either side of the aisle. And it's just not acceptable. I don't care if he's a Democrat or Republican, fix the damn bridge.
Yeah, the level of impact that's had on the economy in Rhode Island, it's mind-boggling to me, that he might be reelected. It's mind-boggling to me. I mean, it's really been a disaster. Not to harp on it, and to Greg's point, we'll keep it tight, but it's been a disaster, and I appreciate the work you're doing. And again, anything we can do to help you push it through. You need my voice, you need specific voices from businesses, just let us know.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to go to Bill Townsend, and then after that, it will be Adam Silverleaf. So Bill, if you're there, come on in.
Yeah. Can you see me? I hope.
I can't, but maybe others can.
I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, I see you. There you are.
Hey.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a company, we're actually located about 10 minutes walk from your New England office. And we have a company that builds robots that help patients in hospitals recover from stroke. And we're about to ship our 100th unit in the United States. And we're also shipping them overseas, although that's a little bit up in the air right now. So I had a question. We also, as a small part of what we do put in for SBIRs just to keep ourselves at the cutting edge in our business. We have a lot of competition from overseas, especially from China, but also from European companies. And we really need those SBIRs to keep that, keep us sharp. It was my understanding that there's a law in place for the SBIRs that, like NIH is where our proposals are, that they must spend 3%, at least 3% of their spend on SBIRs. And we have for the last year and a half now, we've got 4 SBIRs that just seem to be frozen in state where they are. And just curious if you happen to know where any of that stands. I know it has to be reauthorized in September.
Yeah, it does. Bill, we'll follow up with you to work one-on-one on the casework element of this. You're right that SBIR is going to be reauthorized. SBIR, and actually I've seen some of the draft legislation circulating on SBIR reauthorization, and it's good. It's bipartisan, thoughtful upgrades that basically try to crack down on some of the SBIR mills that are not doing
Excellent.
real innovation and are just kind of there to cycle through SBIR money, and try to reward companies like you that are using it really as sort of a R&D boost, right? So
That's welcome.
so let's let's hope we get something good out of the 119th. But we'll follow up with you to talk about the specific SBIR grants you have.
Okay, can someone actually just
thank you.
clarify what SBIR is? Someone just asked.
Oh, sorry, you're right. We shouldn't speak in Small Business Innovation Research.
Research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
It's like R&D grants for small businesses.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And
Right.
we're going to go to Adam. In
Thank
just a
you.
minute, but I wanted to, someone had submitted this question, Congressman. A restaurant in one of our chamber communities has an employee who was just told that he has to self-deport and needs to do it. I think he has a Sunday deadline to book his flight and then a certain amount of time to get out of there. Where do you turn? Where is there some mechanism that you're, through your office that helps somebody who's really just trying to navigate through this? And they've certainly, this person has consulted with lawyers, consulted with Mira and others, but is there another path that you're aware of where they turn if they have this kind of issue?
I don't want to speak generically on casework because every case is different.
Right.
My office is not immigration counsel or immigration casework. So this individual needs immigration counsel, and there are pro bono, a fair bit of pro bono outfits that are doing that. My office really is meant to be a supplement to immigration counsel where we try to get answers faster from federal agencies and also make the process more transparent to both counsel and to the affected individual.
And what is the volume of these kinds of questions you're getting immigration related from people who have specific problems?
Yeah, so we've been tracking this pretty closely. And in fact, we hired a new immigration caseworker when Trump got elected because I had a sense things were going to get rocky. They have not, in terms of immigration casework, they have gone up, but they have not surged to the extent that I was thinking.
Okay. Adam Silverleaf, welcome. I see your camera's on. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us what your business is and where you're located, and then ask your question.
Certainly. Congressman, thank you for doing this and having us. My name is Adam Silverleaf, and I live in your district in Sharon. I have two automobile dealerships. One is a Honda dealership in Raynham, which is also in your district, and the other is a Silco Volkswagen in Easton, which used to be in your district until they moved the line on you by a few miles. The Volkswagen dealership is a brand new $18 million building that we just opened up in January. Between both that and the Honda franchise, we have 96 employees. Obviously, the tariffs are certainly of great concern to us. The automobile industry in the United States pumps 1.2 trillion into the economy each year. It represents 4.8% of the U.S. total GDP. The average dealership in the United States has 63 employees. In Massachusetts, it has 57 employees. The average dealership wage earner in Massachusetts, these are good paying jobs, earns $94,068. In the United States, the average worker earns $81,692, where the average wage earner in the United States earns $66,622. So typically these are well-paying jobs. The people who work with us and work at dealerships contribute immensely to the commerce and to the economy of the country. And I certainly don't need to preach to the choir with you on it, but it's a serious concern. As I was waiting to come on, got an automotive news alert that Ford just this afternoon announced to their dealers that they will be raising prices in May. So that's, Volkswagen and Honda both said that they were going to hold prices through May, and after that, no promises. But here you have one of the big three centered in Detroit already, knuckling under the pressures of this. It's a huge concern to us. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir. A lot of data, Congressman, I did send over to Dana. I don't know if she was able to pass that small non-addictive sedative along to you to read at night.
Can I ask you, Adam, are you are potential customers asking about car insurance when they're looking at the sticker price?
They're asking about everything, the total cost of ownership, insurance, maintenance, what is it going to cost to maintain the car now versus tomorrow, because they hear cars and parts, and that's a concern of ours too.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wrote about a couple months ago, is that car insurance might actually be the earliest indicator of the inflationary impact of tariffs. Because, as you know, car insurance is a message from the future about the cost of repairing or rebuilding a car.
Correct.
And the car insurance companies, they have to underwrite the full impact of tariffs. They can't bank on the fact that maybe, he'll change his mind about this or that thing. And so I think what we're going to see with car insurance is, these are all parts that are imported, or a lot of them are, and they're all going to get more expensive, and that's going to raise the total cost of ownership and depress sales also.
It's definitely a concern. And, theoretically, you could take a car that today has let's call it a price of $50,000. The tariffs hit it. Now it's in the, $60,000. If there's a total replacement shortly after it left the lot, it leaves the lot, and 3 months later there's a total, and you're going to get really all of it back because the depreciation is minimal at that point. All of a sudden it could cost $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 more to replace that car, which is the exact same vehicle. It's a huge worry. I kind of, like you, I'm scratching my head. I don't care what side of the aisle you're from. This seems to make very little sense. And this is just my little world, and my little world is, you can go to so many other industries and sing the same story.
What they're banking on, the way that what the political strategists behind this, and it's all politics, what they're banking on is that they can raise wages in the upper Midwest. That is their focus. They do not care. I cannot emphasize this enough. They do not care about prices or businesses in Massachusetts. They don't care about prices or businesses, frankly, in Texas, because those are two states that they know how they're going to vote. They care about the blue wall states in the upper Midwest, and these tariffs, I have it on relatively good authority that they're designing them, and they're trying to boost wages in those upper Midwest states. I actually don't think it's ultimately going to work even then, because, as I said at the top of this conversation, for tariffs to have that kind of impact, they have to be nested within industrial policy and diplomacy and certainty, so that they can actually have any of the reindustrialization effects that are claimed for them. What's happening now is just chaos. Chaos is bad for business everywhere, including the upper Midwest.
Thank you very much, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you,
We're going to
Congressman.
go to Patrick DiDello Russo Jr. from Taunton, and then after that it'll be Mitzi Weinman.
Congressman, thank you so much for putting this together. From Patrick DiDello Russo, I'm CFO for the city of Taunton. Mayor O'Connell sends her regards, and thanks you for having this as well. Couple quick questions that I have from a city perspective is, last night I provided an update to the city council related to federal funding, and we've sent the message of, it's not time to panic, it's time to prepare, to kind of ease sort of residents' concerns. It's obviously becoming a political issue, even at local politics as well. Would you have any suggestions or any message back to folks in the city that, what should we be preparing for as it relates to some of the cuts that, and not cuts directly, but some of the reductions in funding that impact our community development block grants, our federal aid for students' lunch programs? What type of movement do you see on that? Do you really see that being realistically trimmed back coming out of the budget process?
I don't know is the most candid answer, because I don't think Trump knows, nor congressional Republicans. I have seen no indication that Title I funding or IDEA funding, which are the sort of the Department of Education streams of funding for local school districts, I haven't seen any indication that those are being cut. I think, Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, I do think we've seen that CDBG could be trimmed back. I think the most direct impact, though, in my view, the most direct impact is going to be there's cuts to Medicaid. That affects the state budget. The state then has to plug that budget, partly by cutting Medicaid services, but probably not entirely. They're also going to have to pull back elsewhere. I would be surprised if that led to Chapter 70 their education funding. I don't think that'll be the case, particularly with the millionaires tax. But it's hard not to see some of that impacting local budgets. But it might look like it's coming from state pullback, but I think the real culprit would ultimately be federal Medicaid cuts.
Right. And then the second question it's impacting us is you and I have had conversations about the city's capital programming together. We invested a lot into solar based upon the federal tax credits. Is there any idea or what's going on with those potential pullbacks?
I think that the solar investment and production tax credits are here to stay. I don't want to be declarative, but the biggest beneficiary of the Inflation Reduction Act's climate and clean energy investments was Texas, right? So, those congressional members may say one thing in public, but
they don't want the reality on the other side. I get it.
Yeah, they're going to go talk to the speaker and be like, kind of actually don't want you to do this.
Got it. I appreciate it. Those are my two questions, Congressman. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Patrick. I think we lost Mitzi, so if you wanted to come in, raise your hand again. A question in chat, Congressman. Oh, there you are, Mitzi. I'm sorry. Go right ahead. You're on mute, however.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for my birthday card yesterday. And my question really is not really business related. My husband does import gloves from Asia, and it's been a nightmare for our lives with what's going on. But my question really has to do with, and I can hear and see your frustration as you're answering a lot of these questions, the executive order. Where and how does this become more of a restrictive way of doing things? It's just it is just out of hand. There's no checks and balances. And it's frightening to see that we've got a kingdom versus a democracy, and how quickly our democracy seemingly toppled within 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks of the president taking over. And so it's really about these executive orders that are just crazy, frustrating.
Yeah, it's out of control. And you are right to describe this as an imperial presidency. And it's fitting that we're at the 250th anniversary of Massachusetts rebelling against a king. We find ourselves having to do likewise, right? And candidly, this has been a 50-year overnight disaster, in the sense that Donald Trump has taken these problems to a different order of magnitude with his lawlessness. But the presidency has been assuming too much power now, arguably since the 60s, and Congress has been ceding too much of its prerogative. So we got to do a number of things. One, we have to pull back war powers from the president. These open-ended authorizations for the use of military force that allow a president basically to point to 2001 authorities from Congress to go bomb people in a totally different country is just, that is not how the framers designed this. We've got to sunset those AUMFs and rein back in the power of the president. Congress declares war, the president executes that war. Number two, the power of the purse. Whether it's spending money that we didn't appropriate by declaring an emergency, or not spending money that we did appropriate by impounding that money, neither is appropriate. The president has to spend money that Congress appropriates the way that we tell him to spend it. And congressional Republicans refuse to stand up for that. In fact, they've asked the president to send them basically a bill that allows them to retroactively approve everything he's just done through DOGE. And it's just like, guys, you can agree or disagree on any of these policies, but at least stand up for Congress's right to debate them and have a say in it. It's just pathetic. Third, we've got to take away his powers to do sanctions and tariffs without congressional approval. This is under a bill known as IEPA, International Emergency something something Act from the 1970s, IEPA. And it has never been used this way before. It's always been used in a relatively scoped manner, but the way the bill is written is way too broad, and we've got to rescind that. And then finally, we have to pull back his domestic law enforcement powers, right, through the Alien and Sedition Acts and the Insurrection Act, bills that are 200 years old, bills that frankly were not particularly well regarded even when they were drafted, and are certainly not appropriate these days. So we have allowed this president to take over way too much power. And the question for Democrats is going to be, when we do take back the House, when we do have some leverage because he's lame ducked and because Senate Republicans suddenly want to do business again, are we going to have the discipline to say, we're going to do good governance reforms? We don't care if the next president is a Democrat or Republican. This is about the Constitution. No president should have this much power anymore because it creates chaos. You don't know what's going to happen every 4 years.
You don't know what's going to happen the next day.
Yeah.
Congressman, a follow-up on the executive orders that's puzzled me. Is it, so you get an executive order, say on DEI and outlawing DEI programs, and that's legally questionable in of itself, but how is it legally even considered that if it's like you had a DEI program 2 years ago and you could be punished for that program retroactively, back before the executive order? Do you have understanding how that's even?
I don't want to dig into the law on that because I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
Basically, the president, within the executive branch, right? If the president wants to issue executive orders to the military about how they do officer training, he's well within his rights to do that. That's pretty well established. It can't contravene statute, but as long as he's within statute, there's a lot of discretion there. Same with, air traffic controllers, or if it's within the executive branch and he's in charge of the agencies, he can sort of hire and fire within the law and train within the law. But I think what you're referring to is the way he's using federal contracts as a way to kind of impose rules of the road on the private or nonprofit sectors. And I agree.
For something you did a year ago or longer ago.
Retroactively, yeah.
Yeah, retroactively. And so in terms of that in higher ed, I'd love to just get your sense of where we go on higher ed. And we understand that Trump administration has now revoked 80 visas, student visas across New England. What's the path there?
Harvard took an important step back, I think, on the road to restoring its reputation by agreeing, by I should say rallying to refute Trump. Harvard is, it's a truth-seeking institution. That's on its shield, Veritas. And if it's going to seek truth, it cannot bend to political pressure. That's authoritarian impulses on the right. It's also, though, progressive orthodoxies on the left. It's got to be free of both. It's got to be able to pursue ideas without fear or favor. And I think Harvard's done a bad job of that, frankly, in recent years. But this is a step on the road back. I strongly support what Harvard is doing. I hope it becomes a rallying point, not just for other universities, but actually for the institutions of civil society, for businesses, for law firms, for people to say, we actually are going to lock arms and say, this is not, you are not a king and we're not going to accept this.
Great, thank you. We have time for probably 2 or 3 more questions from folks if they want. We're going to start with Ian Lang in Brookline.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Ian Lang. I'm the CEO of the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health. We're a community mental health provider in Brookline that combines a pretty robust outpatient direct services side that provides about 40,000 visits a year to over 2,000 individuals, with a recently launched Innovation Institute that's really looking to design, test, and scale new community-based models to mental health care. So that sort of sets the stage for the 2-part question. Well, I guess one is less of a question since you've talked a lot about the Medicaid cuts already, but really just an urging to do whatever you can to preserve as much of Medicaid as you possibly can from a provider perspective. We're providing, 1,000 people a year with access to healthcare because we can bill Medicaid. And so anything that reduces the number of people on Medicaid, the amount that we can get reimbursed, is going to come at a huge cost to individuals, which I know but from a provider perspective would be devastating, both to them and to our bottom line. The second thing, the question I wanted to ask you, and maybe to pick up on there is a future, right? In 2 years, hopefully we'll have a new Congress. And so I was recently listening to your appearance on the Ezra Klein show, where you talked about the abundance agenda and the supply side, sort of changing the supply. And so as a mental health provider, I was wondering if you had thoughts about how could what's a big idea about how we can reform the way healthcare is supplied, the provision of that service, so that we can have a positive forward-looking agenda for the future of healthcare in this state or more broadly this country. So,
Well, Ian, you and I should, we got to set up some time to have a deeper conversation, because that is a question that deserves a rich conversation that I won't be able to do justice to. But the short answer to that is, I actually, and I said this to Ezra, I think the abundance agenda actually has a little bit of a blind spot on healthcare for a number of reasons. But one thing I'm a strong supporter of is if you're thinking about our US healthcare system as a series of cost centers, if you want to make healthcare less expensive and you think about it as a series of cost centers, we know that some of the most expensive places are nursing facilities, intensive care units, emergency rooms, and then jails. And I put jails in the healthcare system because here in Massachusetts, 75% of inmates at the county correctional institutes have mental health issues, right, as you well know. And it's very expensive. All those are very expensive places. And so the goal really, for cost containment for healthcare, one of the goals is how do you deflect people from those services? And what you are doing is a terrific example of that. I don't know your numbers, but I suspect that you could prove out actuarially that when you're treating people for mental health issues on the front end and you're providing them with societal and integrated support, that is a much better deal for society, not to mention for that individual and their family, than they wind up in jail, right? Or they wind up in an ER, cycling through the system. And so getting on the front edge of primary and preventative care is critically important. But you need dedicated funding streams to do that, not just institutions like yours, but community health centers as well, which for 1% of all US healthcare spending treat 10% of Americans. And so I'm excited, and this is a controversial proposal, but I'm excited by examples like in Philadelphia and Newark and maybe even here in Boston about levying sales taxes, particularly on sugary beverages, which drive a lot of chronic diseases, and using those as funding streams dedicated towards public health institutions like yours, like community health centers. Because ultimately, the way to create durable political constituencies around this is to have the money and the service paired together, not just statutorily, but also politically in people's minds, in the way that Social Security works, right? Payroll tax, which by itself people wouldn't love, but when they know that it's associated with Social Security, it becomes the most popular federal program in American history.
Yeah, I would love the opportunity to have a further conversation. Just real quick, one of the programs that we've launched and designed is a program called Bright, which works with kids as they transition back to school after an extended absence due to mental health related reasons. That program is now in about 300 schools across 7 states. But what is sort of, to your point about cost savings, this is a program that works with kids. If you have a significant mental illness and you miss a chunk of school, about 50% of kids will drop out of high school. For
Right.
kids who have the Bright intervention, 95% are on track to graduate by the end of the year in which they had that intervention, which then drives all sorts of better outcomes long-term, lower cost, better employment, all of that kind of stuff. And so would welcome the opportunity to talk more. And again, thank you for your time and for your vision about, I was really, as I said, listening to Ezra Klein, your vision for the future of where we can go when we get through this current challenge. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Ian.
Thank you, Ian. A submitted question, Congressman. My organization works with immigrants, including Afghans, who are here legally through temporary protected status that they had in Afghanistan because they worked with Americans. The Trump administration is now pulling back their legal status. Curious about your thoughts about this as a veteran.
It's appalling. I'm a supporter and co-sponsor of the Afghan Adjustment Act, which would be an act of Congress that would provide permanent legal status for our Afghan allies here in the United States. I actually got to talk to a number of these Afghan former Afghan allies here in the United States who have been working at a manufacturing plant in southeastern Massachusetts. And it's just a great American story. And it's just another example of the cruelty and counterproductive nature of this administration. They're not just doing it to Afghans, they're doing it to Haitians and Venezuelans and Salvadorians, where they're revoking TPS for people, upending their lives. That is regrettably something the president has a lot of authority over. It's why we need comprehensive immigration reform in Congress, which I'm a co-sponsor of, bipartisan immigration bills that, frankly, they're gonna make the hard right mad, and they're also gonna make the hard left mad. These are bills that are compromises, but I'm on them because that's what we need. We need Congress to take the lead on this, because if Congress doesn't, one, you get a president who can just issue and revoke and upend people's lives. And two, the chaos spills onto states and localities, as Massachusetts saw with the migrant shelter crisis over the last 2 years. Congress has to take the lead, and I'm willing to take tough votes to do that. I see almost no in fact, I see zero prospect of that happening in the 119th Congress, to be transparent. It's just, Speaker Johnson's not going to do that. He's going to let Trump operate in an executive fiat manner.
Thank you, Congressman. And one,
Oh, can I just add one thing, just because it is in the district? If folks want to get involved with helping Afghans with special immigrant visas, though, the Shapiro Foundation is doing terrific work on this, the Shapiro Foundation, and I actually was just talking to Ed Shapiro about this, and he has been trucking along on helping the Afghan people, even with this administration.
fabulous. Thank you for that. An anonymous person says, what is being done to investigate what DOJ just did to the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, stealing data, concealing the intrusion, and the Russian attack on the sensitive data at NLRB?
The NLRB, the president's authority to dismantle NLRB as an independent agency is in the courts now. I co-signed the amicus brief in defense of the NLRB. I believe it's illegal what he did, what DOJ did. Congress authorized this agency. The president cannot negate it. I'm worried that the Supreme Court is actually going to rule in favor of the president, though, under the unitary executive theory, which probably somewhere like 5 to 6 of the justices on the Supreme Court are sympathetic to unitary executive theory, which basically says within the executive branch, the president can do whatever he wants because he is the only named officer of Article 2 in the Constitution. I disagree with that. I think Congress can make laws and he has to take care that they're faithfully executed. And if we make a law that says this agency is independent and you have to do A, B, and C before you fire people, you have to show cause, you have to give notice, then he has to do that. That's the law. So I strongly disagree. I am worried that the Supreme Court is going to basically assent to the gutting of the NLRB, though.
All right. I have one last question for you in a minute, but first I wanted to thank you for your time. And, I think all my chamber colleagues will tell you that most of the time when you get an elected official coming before you, they want to limit on the kinds of questions and the type of questions, and you never have any rules on that. You'll take anything and everything, and I respect that, and I think we all do. And on behalf of the Blackstone Valley Chamber, the Brookline Chamber, the Cranberry County Chamber, One South Coast Chamber, Taunton Chamber, Tri-Town Chamber, and our Charles River Regional Chamber, we want to thank you for your time and your leadership and making yourself so accessible. Not just today, but you always do this throughout the district, and your staff does that too. So we are frustrated, demoralized as a business community in so many different ways, some of which we touched on today and many which we didn't get to. And it's difficult every day with that news cycle that you never know what's going to happen, as you said. Can you give us any hope? Can you tell us where you see silver linings? Where is the optimism? How do we find, what's the path forward?
The great virtue of American democracy is that it's self-correcting. And this was the brilliance of the founders, is that they knew, they had no illusions about the quality of individuals who might surface in this great experiment in self-governance. They knew there was going to be tyrants and morons and everything in combination thereof. And what they did is they built in so many self-correcting mechanisms into American democracy. That is ultimately our core strength. And I think we're going to see, in fact, I am confident we are going to see many mechanisms of self-correction, not just the separation of powers and the checks and balances, but the American people themselves are going to act in ways electoral and otherwise to make clear what we made clear 250 years ago in the battlefields of Lexington and Concord. So I know it's stormy seas right now, but we all got our hands on the helm together.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated. And thank you. It was great to have so many people from across the 4th District together,
Yes,
asking questions and participating. So much appreciated. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, everyone, for participating.
Be well, everyone.
All right, take care.
Thank you.